The moment I realized my family had already decided my place, I was standing in a hallway with a folder of legal documents pressed against my chest, listening to my mother explain my life as if I were not there. "She'll be fine," she said, waving a hand the way people do when they want to end a conversation. "Claire is always fine. She doesn't need to be involved in this." My name is Claire Donovan. I was 31 years old that winter, old enough to know when something small had just crossed the line into something irreversible. The hallway smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old carpet. We were inside my parents' house in suburban Connecticut, the same house where I grew up learning to stay quiet, stay useful, and stay out of the way when emotions got complicated. The folder in my arms contained papers I hadn't known existed until 3 days earlier. Drafts of a revised will, documents related to a family trust. The words were clean, official, unemotional. What they described was not. I wasn't angry yet. That came later. In that moment, I felt something colder. Recognition. My mother stood across from me beside the dining room table, her coat still on purse hanging from her arm. My father sat in his usual chair, hands folded, eyes fixed on a spot just above the fireplace. My younger brother Ethan leaned against the wall, scrolling on his phone, already disengaged. And then there was my sister Melissa, standing close to my mother, one manicured hand resting lightly on her arm, like punctuation. "This is just paperwork," Melissa said, finally turning to look at me. Her smile was tight, but practiced. "You don't need to stress yourself out over it. We're handling things." Handling things. The phrase landed heavier than it should have. 3 days earlier, I had come home for what I thought was a routine pre-holiday visit. Thanksgiving was a week away. My parents had called and said they wanted to talk logistics while everyone was in town. That alone should have been a warning. In our family, logistics were never just logistics. I had taken time off from my job at a mid-size architectural firm in Boston, the same firm where I had been quietly passed over for promotion twice while mentoring the people who got it. I was used to being told to wait, to be patient, to understand the bigger picture. I had arrived at my parents' house with a bottle of wine and the expectation that we'd discuss travel plans, dinner timing, maybe who was bringing dessert. Instead, my mother had slid an envelope across the kitchen counter and said, "We've made some updates." I remember reading the first page and feeling my stomach tighten. The trust my grandmother had established years ago, the one my parents had always referred to as "for the kids," had been restructured. Assets reallocated, control transferred. Melissa's name appeared everywhere. Mine barely at all. At first I assumed it was an error, a draft, something incomplete. I asked a question calmly the way I always did. "Why am I not listed as a beneficiary anymore?" My mother didn't answer right away. She glanced at Melissa, then at my father, as if checking the order of operations. "Well," she said slowly, "we thought it made sense to streamline things." Streamline. Another word that sounded harmless until you looked closely. Melissa stepped in before I could ask another question. "You're doing well on your own, Claire. You don't need this like Ethan and I do. You've always been independent." Independent. Strong. Capable. The holy trinity of reasons people used to explain why they could take something from you without guilt. I stood there holding the papers, feeling the shift happen in real time. This wasn't about money, not really. It was about control, about who got to decide, about who mattered enough to be consulted. Now, 3 days later in that hallway, my mother was still talking, still justifying, still assuming my silence meant agreement. "We didn't think you'd want the responsibility," she said. "Managing assets, dealing with lawyers. Melissa has more time for that sort of thing. And Ethan, well, he needs the security." I finally spoke. My voice at first surprised me by how steady it was. "You removed me without telling me." My father flinched slightly but didn't look up. Melissa sighed as if I were making things difficult. "You're taking this personally. It's not about you." That was the moment something clicked into place. Not shattered. Clicked. I saw the pattern clearly for the first time. Every holiday where my schedule was the one adjusted. Every birthday dinner rescheduled because Melissa was busy. Every decision made for my own good without my input. I had mistaken accommodation for love. Silence for harmony. I looked down at the folder in my hands. These weren't just papers. They were proof. Evidence that my role in this family had been decided long ago. Not the daughter to consult, not the sister to consider. The one who would understand. "I need copies of everything I said." My mother blinked. "Why?" "Because I want my lawyer to review them. The word lawyer changed the air instantly. Melissa straightened. You don't need to do that. This is family. I met her eyes. That's exactly why I do. No one argued. That was the strangest part. They exchanged looks, small, irritated, resigned, as if I had finally stepped out of character, and they didn't yet know how to respond. My father spoke for the first time, his voice low. Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be. I nodded once. That decision already got made. I turned and walked toward the front door, the folder still pressed to my chest. Behind me, I heard my mother say my name sharp and warning. I didn't stop. Outside, the air was cold and clean. I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing, feeling the weight of what I had just learned settle into something solid. This wasn't the beginning of a fight. It was the beginning of an accounting. That night, alone in my childhood bedroom, I laid the documents out across the bed and read every line slowly. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I took notes. Because somewhere between being excluded and being dismissed, I had crossed into something else entirely. I was done waiting to be chosen. And for the first time, I understood that revenge doesn't always start with anger. Sometimes it starts with clarity. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was angry and not because I was afraid. I stayed awake because my brain had shifted into a mode I recognized well from work. The quiet, methodical focus that comes after a problem reveals its true shape. I lay on my old twin bed, staring at the faint crack in the ceiling I'd known since high school, replaying moments I had always dismissed as harmless. Each one slid into place with unsettling precision. At 2:17 a.m., I stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding. By morning, the house was quiet. My parents had gone out early, probably to avoid conversation. That avoidance had always been my father's specialty. Melissa and Ethan were still asleep. I brewed coffee alone in the kitchen and spread the documents across the table again this time, with my laptop open beside them. I didn't Google emotionally, I Googled structurally. Family trust, Connecticut Modification Authority, beneficiary removal without notice, fiduciary duty violations. The language was dry, precise, comforting. By 8:40 a.m., I knew 3 things for certain. First, my grandmother's original trust had included a clause requiring written notice to all beneficiaries before any material change. I had received nothing. Second, the trust had been amended less than 6 weeks after my grandmother's death, a window of time where grief often softened resistance and questions went unasked. Third, the attorney who processed the change was not the firm my grandmother had used for decades. It was a smaller office in New Haven, one Melissa had previously mentioned in passing as someone Andrew's dad recommended. Andrew, her fiancé. I closed my laptop slowly. This wasn't just family favoritism. This was coordination. My phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Melissa. Are you still upset Mom's really stressed? You know she hates conflict. I stared at the message for a long moment, then set the phone face down. I wasn't upset. Upset implied emotion without direction. What I felt was resolve. At 10 o'clock, I packed my bag. I didn't announce my departure. I didn't leave a note. I simply took the documents, my coat, and my car keys and drove back toward Boston. The drive gave me space to think. I replayed conversations from the last few years with a different lens. How Melissa had slowly positioned herself as the responsible one, despite never holding a job longer than 18 months. How Ethan's financial instability had always been framed as fragile rather than irresponsible. How my steady income and lack of drama had become justification. Claire doesn't need backup. Claire can handle it. Claire will understand. Understanding, I realized, had become my unpaid labor. I didn't confront anyone that week. I went back to work. I answered emails. I smiled in meetings. I submitted a revised proposal for a mixed-use development project that everyone assumed my supervisor would present as his own. On Friday afternoon, I took a half day and walked into the office of Margaret Hill, estate attorney. She was in her late 60s with sharp eyes and a voice that didn't waste time. She reviewed the documents in silence, flipping pages once, twice, then laying them out neatly. They removed you improperly, she said. No hesitation, no softening. I exhaled for the first time in days. Do I have options? I asked. You have leverage, she replied, which is better. She explained the process carefully, not emotionally. If the amendment violated the original trust terms, it could be contested. That didn't guarantee reinstatement, but it opened doors, discovery, depositions, timelines. Exposure. What would that mean for my family? I asked. Margaret looked at me steadily. It would mean they would have to explain their decisions under oath. I nodded. That was enough. I didn't tell her to proceed. Not yet. I asked her to prepare. On Sunday, my mother called. "Claire, we need to talk," she said, already tired. "I'm listening," I replied and meant it. She spoke for 10 minutes without stopping. About stress, about how much Melissa had on her plate with the wedding, about how Ethan needed stability, about how my grandmother would have wanted unity. Not once did she ask how I felt. When she finally paused, I said one sentence. "I'm having the trust reviewed by counsel." Silence. Then panic poorly disguised. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "That's extreme." "No," I said calmly. "What was done without my knowledge was extreme." She tried another angle. "You don't need the money." "That's not the point." "Well, what is the point?" she snapped. I thought about it, then answered honestly. "The point is that you made a permanent decision about my place in this family without me." She didn't respond right away. "We were protecting everyone," she said finally. I closed my eyes. "You were protecting the version of me that never says no." After the call, my phone lit up with messages. Melissa, then Ethan, then my father, who left a voicemail that said only, "Call your mother." I didn't. Instead, I forwarded the attorney's formal notice to Margaret Hill and authorized her to send a letter requesting documentation related to the amendment. No accusations, no threats, just a request. 3 days later, my parents received it. Melissa called immediately. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Do you have any idea what this could do?" "Yes," I said. "That's why I'm doing it." "You're blowing this up right before my wedding," she said. "You're punishing all of us." I paused. "No, I'm refusing to disappear quietly." She scoffed. "You always think you're the victim." That was new. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe I just never let myself hear it clearly. "I'll let the lawyers talk," I said, and ended the call. That night, alone in my apartment, I poured a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, the city lights blinking beyond the window. This wasn't revenge yet. It wasn't confrontation. It was positioning. I wasn't asking for apologies. I wasn't demanding inclusion. I was doing something far more unsettling to people who relied on my silence. I was making myself visible in a system that benefited from ignoring me. And once visibility enters the room, control begins to slip. The letter didn't accuse anyone of wrongdoing. That was the part that unsettled them most. Margaret Hill's request was polite, concise, and legally airtight. It asked for copies of the original trust, all amendments, correspondence related to the changes, and a timeline of decisions. It gave a deadline, 10 business days. No threats, no drama, just paper and consequence. My mother called again 2 days later. This time her voice was controlled in a way that told me she'd rehearsed. "We got the letter," she said. "We don't understand why you're doing this to us." I leaned back in my office chair, staring at the half-finished elevation drawings on my screen. Around me, the hum of printers and low conversation continued. My life hadn't paused just because theirs felt threatened. "I'm not doing anything to you," I said. "I'm responding to something that was already done." "That attorney is going to turn this into a mess," she said. "Families don't survive things like this." I let the sentence hang between us. "Families also don't survive pretending nothing happened," I replied. She sighed. Melissa is beside herself. I imagined my sister pacing her condo phone, pressed to her ear, anger disguised as distress. Melissa didn't spiral because she felt guilty. She spiraled when control slipped. "I'm sure she is," I said. "You could stop this," my mother added quickly, "before it gets ugly." That was the first time she acknowledged the possibility of consequences. Not harm done to me, consequences to them. "I could," I said, "but I won't." The silence that followed felt heavier than shouting ever could. That weekend, I attended a Thanksgiving planning dinner I hadn't planned to go to. I showed up anyway. I arrived exactly on time. I brought nothing but myself. The house was louder than usual. Melissa's laughter carried through the living room, a little too sharp, a little too frequent. Ethan sat on the arm of a chair, nodding along to whatever she said. My parents hovered between rooms, tense and alert, like hosts anticipating a spill. Conversation slowed when I walked in. "Claire," my mother said, forcing a smile. "You made it." "I said I would," I replied. Melissa turned toward me, her eyes scanning my face like she was looking for cracks. "You look tired," she said. "I am," I answered simply. We sat around the dining table with plates untouched. Talk circled harmless topics at first: weather, travel, wedding venues. Then Melissa leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. So she said lightly, "How's Boston?" There it was, the opening. "It's fine," I said. "No drama," she pressed. I met her gaze, not on my end. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Melissa smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You know Mom's been really upset about that letter," I know, I said. You could have just talked to us, she continued, instead of bringing in lawyers. I folded my napkin slowly. I tried to talk. I wasn't included. That's not fair, she said quickly. You weren't excluded. We just made decisions. For me, I said. Without me. My father cleared his throat. Let's not do this tonight. No, I said calmly. Tonight is fine. The table went still. Melissa's voice sharpened. Why are you acting like we took something from you? You're successful. You don't need a trust. I didn't say I needed it, I replied. I said you removed me. That's semantics. No, I said. That's consent. My mother reached for her glass. Her hand trembled slightly. We thought you'd understand, she said softly. I looked at her. Really looked? The woman who had taught me to be agreeable, to be low maintenance, to be proud of not needing anything? I did understand, I said. For a long time. That's why this worked. Melissa laughed once, incredulous. You're making us sound like villains. I'm not assigning roles, I said. I'm describing actions. The word actions seemed to land hard. Ethan finally spoke. What happens if you win? The question surprised me. It was the first honest one of the night. I don't know, I said. This isn't about winning. Melissa scoffed. Then what is it about? I answered without hesitation. Being acknowledged as someone whose absence should have required explanation. No one spoke. That was the moment I saw it clearly in their faces. Confusion, yes. Fear, maybe. But also something else. They hadn't realized how much they relied on my silence until it was gone. After dinner, Melissa cornered me near the stairs. You're really going through with this, she said. Yes. You know this could expose things, she warned. I tilted my head slightly. Then it's good the truth is already written down. Her jaw tightened. You always think you're so righteous. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. When I left that night, my phone buzzed before I reached the car. A notification from Margaret Hill. Documents received. Preliminary review indicates discrepancies. We should talk. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, hands resting on the wheel, the house glowing behind me. This was no longer theoretical. They had underestimated something critical. I wasn't trying to punish them. I was letting the structure they built finally bear weight. And structures, when stressed in the wrong places, don't bend quietly. They crack. The discrepancies weren't dramatic. That was what made them dangerous. Margaret Hill explained it over a call the following Tuesday, her tone measured almost casual. The trust amendment had been executed quickly without a formal family meeting. There were missing signatures, dates that didn't align, language added that subtly shifted control without clearly documenting consent. Nothing illegal on its face, she said, but enough irregularity to justify discovery. Discovery meant questions, depositions, records. People who had never expected to explain themselves would be required to do exactly that. I listened without interrupting, taking notes the way I did at work when a project entered a sensitive phase. Do you want to proceed? She asked. Yes, I said. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt focused. That evening, I came home to 3 missed calls. One from my mother, one from Ethan, one from an unfamiliar number with a Connecticut area code. I returned none of them. Instead, I made dinner. Simple. Quiet. I ate at the counter and watched the city settle into night. There was something grounding about the ordinariness of it all. The world hadn't ended. No alarms had sounded. People only panic when consequences stop being theoretical. The unfamiliar number called again the next morning. I answered this time. Claire Donovan, a man asked. Yes, this is Thomas Reed. I represent your parents. Of course he did. He spoke carefully, as if stepping onto ice he hadn't tested yet. He explained that my parents were surprised by the legal action, that they wanted to resolve things amicably, that court would be unpleasant for everyone. I agree, I said. There was a pause. Then perhaps we can talk about withdrawal. No, I replied. Another pause. This one longer. May I ask what you want, Ms. Donovan, he said. I considered the question. I want the process followed correctly, I said. That's all. He tried again. Your parents are willing to discuss alternative arrangements. I'm sure they are, I said. My attorney will handle communication. When I hung up, my hands were steady. That surprised me. I had spent most of my life bracing myself before conversations like that, preparing to explain, to soften, to compromise. This time, there was nothing to explain. By the end of the week, Margaret confirmed that formal discovery had begun. That's when the tone changed. Melissa sent me a message that wasn't angry exactly. It was clipped. Strategic. We need to talk privately. No lawyers. I stared at it for a long time before responding. I'm comfortable keeping this professional. Her reply came quickly. You're enjoying this. I typed, then erased, then typed again. I'm not enjoying it. I'm finished absorbing it. She didn't respond. 2 days later, my father emailed me directly. Not a voicemail. Not a request to call my mother. An email. Claire, I don't understand why this has gone so far. You know your mother and I would never intentionally hurt you. This feels like retaliation and it's tearing the family apart. We raised you better than this. Dad. I read it once, then again. We raised you better than this. The sentence landed with more force than he probably intended. It carried the weight of decades. The implication that asserting myself was a deviation from the role I had been assigned. I didn't respond immediately. That night, I opened an old photo album I'd brought back from my parents' house years ago. I hadn't looked at it in a long time. The photos were familiar. Birthdays, holidays, graduations. In nearly every one, I was on the edge of the frame. Not absent, not excluded outright, just peripheral. I closed the album and drafted a response to my father. Short, unemotional. Dad, this isn't retaliation. It's documentation. If the process had been fair, there would be nothing to defend. I'm not tearing the family apart. I'm refusing to hold it together alone. Claire, I didn't wait for his reply. The first deposition was scheduled the following week. Not for me. For the attorney who had processed the amendment. A quiet man named Alan Brooks. Margaret explained that his testimony would establish whether standard procedure had been followed. It's usually boring, she said, until it isn't. Melissa called me that night. You're humiliating us, she said without greeting. I leaned against my kitchen counterphone, pressed to my ear. I didn't make anything public, I said. People are talking, she snapped. Andrew's parents are asking questions. There it was. What questions, I asked. About why you were removed, she said. About why the amendment was rushed. I pictured her wedding plans spread across her dining table. Guest lists, seating charts. Everything arranged for appearance, not stability. Those are reasonable questions, I said. You could stop this before it ruins things, she insisted. I exhaled slowly. Melissa, if the truth ruins something, it was already unstable. Her voice dropped. You've always resented me. No, I said. I resented being invisible. She laughed sharp and brittle. You're not invisible. You just weren't the priority. The words hung between us. Thank you, I said quietly. For what? For saying it out loud? I ended the call. That night I slept. Not deeply, but enough. The deposition transcript arrived 3 days later. Margaret called me as soon as she'd read it. He admitted he never met with you, she said. He relied on representations made by your sister and parents. My chest tightened slightly. Anything else, I asked. He also confirmed that the original trust required beneficiary notification. He assumed it had been handled. Assumed. The word was small, but it carried weight. Next steps, I asked. We depose your parents, she said, and your sister. I closed my eyes briefly. This was the escalation point, the place where people either accepted responsibility or doubled down. That evening, I walked through my apartment and noticed how calm it felt. No tension, no raised voices, no pressure to perform a role. Just space. I realized something then that hadn't occurred to me before. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. It was about authorship. For the first time, I was writing my own position into the record. And once something is recorded, it can't be erased by rewriting the story later. They had built a system that worked as long as I stayed quiet. Now that I wasn't, the structure was starting to show its weaknesses. And we were only at the beginning. The depositions were scheduled for the same week as Melissa's bridal shower. I didn't plan it that way. Neither did Margaret. The overlap was coincidental, but timing has a way of revealing priorities more clearly than intentions ever do. My mother was deposed on a Tuesday morning. Margaret prepared me for what to expect, even though I wouldn't be in the room. The questions would be precise, calm, non-accusatory. That was the strategy. People reveal more when they don't feel attacked. She's going to lean on intention, Margaret said. She'll say she meant well. I nodded. That sounded right. When the transcript arrived 2 days later, I read it slowly, line by line. My mother had said she didn't think I needed to be notified. She said I was busy. She said I trusted Melissa. She said she assumed I would understand. She said she didn't remember exactly when the decision was made, only that it felt necessary. Necessary, another word I had learned to fear. There was a moment in the transcript that made me stop reading. Question: did you consider how removing Claire without notice might affect her? Answer: we didn't think it would. She's always been strong. I closed the document. That single sentence explained more than hours of conversation ever had. My father's deposition followed the next day. His answers were shorter, evasive. He deferred to my mother often, said he didn't like conflict, said he trusted Melissa to handle details. He admitted he hadn't read the amendment carefully. He admitted he didn't ask why I wasn't included. He admitted he stayed quiet. The pattern was no longer abstract. It was recorded. Melissa's deposition was last. She arrived confident, according to Margaret. Well-dressed, polite, controlled. She described herself as overwhelmed during that period. Wedding planning, work transitions, family pressure. She said she believed I wouldn't mind. She said she assumed I trusted her. She said she was trying to keep things efficient. Then came the question she hadn't anticipated. Question, why did you not inform your sister of the amendment? Answer, because she complicates things. The silence after that line stretched across the page. Margaret didn't need to call me. I could feel the shift through the words alone. That answer reframed everything. It wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't oversight. It was a decision. I received a message from Ethan that night. I didn't know it went this far. I thought it was temporary. I stared at the screen, then typed. It was permanent the moment it was signed. He didn't reply. The following Saturday, I attended Melissa's bridal shower. I showed up because I had been invited, because I wasn't hiding, because visibility mattered. The room buzzed with forced cheer, champagne flutes clinked, pastel decorations filled the space. Melissa looked radiant, tense but radiant. She hugged me stiffly when I arrived. You came, she said. I said I would, I replied. People watched us closely. Andrew's mother in particular. Her eyes followed every interaction. Conversation avoided the obvious at first. Wedding colors, honeymoon plans. Then someone asked how I was doing. Busy, I said. Melissa jumped in quickly. Claire's been dealing with some personal stuff. I smiled politely. Legal, mostly. The word landed. Andrew's mother tilted her head. Legal. Yes, I said. Estate matters. Silence. Melissa laughed too quickly. She's exaggerating. I turned toward her. No, I'm documenting. That night after the shower, my phone rang. It was Andrew. We had never spoken privately before. I don't want to get in the middle, he said. But I need to understand what's happening. I appreciated the honesty. I'm not asking you to take sides, I said, only to pay attention. He exhaled. Melissa didn't tell me you weren't notified. I know. Is this really going to court? Yes, I said, unless accountability happens first. There was a long pause. I didn't know she thought of you that way, he said quietly. I didn't ask which way. You're not obligated to fix this, I said. I know, he replied, but I'm not comfortable pretending it's nothing. After the call, I sat alone in my living room, the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound. This was the phase people never expect. Not the explosion, not the confrontation. The slow, unmistakable unraveling of narratives that depended on silence. Melissa hadn't lost anything yet, but she was losing control of the story. And in families like mine, that's where real power lives. The first settlement offer arrived on a Monday morning. It wasn't generous. It wasn't insulting either. It was careful, calculated, and incomplete in exactly the way I expected. Margaret called me as soon as she received it. They're offering to reinstate you as a partial beneficiary, she said. Limited control. No retroactive accounting. No admission of fault. I pictured my parents' dining room table again. The same one where decisions had been made without me. The same one where silence had been mistaken for consent. No, I said. Margaret didn't sound surprised. I thought you might say that. What does refusing do? I asked. It forces them to explain more, she replied. And it makes people nervous. That was the point. By midweek, the pressure shifted from legal to emotional. My mother called twice and left voicemails that sounded rehearsed, but frayed at the edges. Claire, we're trying to meet you halfway. This is hurting your father. People are starting to ask questions we can't answer. Not once did she say we're sorry. Not once did she say we should have told you. Ethan sent another message. Can we just talk like normal people? I typed back. We can, after the truth is acknowledged. He didn't respond. On Thursday evening, Melissa showed up at my apartment. She hadn't asked. She hadn't texted. She stood in the hallway when I opened the door, dressed sharply, hair perfect, eyes already irritated. You're really doing this, she said. Yes, I replied, stepping aside just enough to let her speak, but not enough to invite her in. She took that as an insult. You're enjoying the attention. I shook my head. I don't want attention. I want accuracy. She scoffed. You always twist words. No, I said calmly. You just don't like when they're recorded. Her jaw tightened. You're about to ruin my wedding. I met her eyes. You didn't think about me when you rewrote my place in the family. That's not fair, she snapped. It's factual, I replied. She crossed her arms. What do you actually want? The question wasn't new, but this time it came without sarcasm. I want the amendment voided, I said. I want the trust restored to its original structure. And I want a written acknowledgement that I was excluded improperly. Her eyes widened slightly. You want us to admit we were wrong? Yes. That would make us look terrible. I paused. That's not my responsibility? She stared at me, searching for the version of me that would soften, negotiate, reassure her. She didn't find it. You're choosing this over family, she said. I exhaled slowly. I'm choosing myself for the first time. Family had nothing to do with that choice. Her voice dropped. You think you're better than us now? No, I said. I think I'm done being smaller. She left without another word. The next day, Margaret called again. They're reconsidering, she said. Your sister's deposition changed things. How so? Her language, Margaret replied. She framed you as an obstacle. That doesn't play well under oath. I smiled faintly, not in satisfaction, in recognition. That weekend, Andrew called me again. I need to ask you something, he said. Did Melissa ever tell you why she thought you complicated things? I thought back. Years of small dismissals, of decisions made faster when I wasn't involved. She never said it directly, I replied. She didn't have to. There was silence on the line. I don't know who I married, he said finally. That's not for me to decide, I said gently. But it matters, he replied, because I'm starting to see patterns. After we hung up, I sat with that thought longer than I expected. This wasn't just about inheritance or control anymore. It was about exposure, about what happens when private dynamics are forced into daylight. On Tuesday, the revised offer arrived. This time it was different. Full reinstatement, equal beneficiary status, retroactive accounting, and a formal addendum acknowledging that beneficiary notification had not occurred as required. No apology, but something better, a record. Margaret waited for my response. Yes, I said, with one condition. She listened. I want my role defined clearly. I continued. No ambiguity, no future discretion that can be interpreted. She smiled through the phone. I'll draft it. When the agreement was finalized, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not relief, closure. The trust was restored. My position was documented. The system corrected itself, not because anyone suddenly understood my feelings, but because the rules demanded it. That night, my mother sent a single text. We signed. I hope you're satisfied. I read it once. Then I set my phone down. Satisfaction had never been the goal. Autonomy was. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting for permission to have it. The paperwork was finalized on a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of gray, uneventful day that rarely announces turning points. Margaret emailed me the signed documents with a short note. Filed and recorded. You're protected now. Protected. The word felt strange, like a coat I wasn't used to wearing. I didn't celebrate. I didn't tell anyone. I closed my laptop and went for a walk instead, letting the city move around me as if nothing had changed. Cars passed, people hurried by with coffees and phones pressed to their ears. Life kept going indifferent to the fact that a structure I had lived inside for 3 decades had just been rewritten. What surprised me most was not the quiet afterward, but who broke it. Andrew asked to meet. He suggested a cafe near my apartment neutral ground. When I arrived, he was already there, hands wrapped around a mug he hadn't touched. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Thank you for coming, he said. I didn't come to mediate, I replied, taking the chair across from him. I know, he said. That's not why I asked. We sat in silence for a moment. He seemed to be organizing his thoughts, something I recognized. People who have lived around strong personalities often forget how to speak without bracing. I read the deposition transcripts, he said finally. I didn't react. Melissa didn't know I had access to them, he continued. But once lawyers are involved, nothing stays contained. I nodded. No, it doesn't. He rubbed a hand over his face. She's been angry. At you, at your parents, at me. But mostly defensive. That tracks, I said. She keeps saying you blindsided her, he said. That you went nuclear. I met his eyes. I documented what already existed. He nodded slowly. That's what scares me. The sentence hung between us. I asked her a simple question, he went on. Why didn't you tell Claire? And she said, because it would have slowed everything down. There it was again. Efficiency over humanity, control over consent. She said you complicate things, he added quietly. I didn't flinch. She's not wrong. I complicate systems that rely on silence. He let out a breath. I don't know how to build a life with someone who thinks that way. That's your decision, I said. Not mine. I know, he replied. but your refusal to back down forced honesty into the room. And once it was there, I couldn't ignore it. I studied him carefully. He wasn't asking me to fix anything. He wasn't asking for reassurance. He was asking for confirmation. This wasn't about hurting her, I said. It was about not disappearing. He nodded. That's what I needed to hear. We finished our coffee without saying much else. When we stood to leave, he paused. For what it's worth, he said, "You didn't ruin anything." I watched him walk away, then sat back down, my hands steady on the table. That conversation reached Melissa faster than I expected. She didn't call. She sent a message. "You talked to Andrew." "Yes," I replied. "You're poisoning him against me." I stared at the screen, then typed. "I'm not responsible for what truth does once it's spoken." Her response came seconds later. "You always do this. You make people choose." I closed my eyes. No, I thought. I stopped choosing for them. That night, my parents came over unannounced. My mother stood in my doorway, looking smaller than I remembered. My father hovered behind her, hands clasped, eyes cautious. "We just want to talk," my mother said. I considered it, then stepped aside. They sat on my couch like guests, not authorities. That alone marked a shift. "We signed because we had no choice," my mother said carefully. "You always had a choice," I replied. "You just didn't like the consequences." She flinched. "This has cost us," she continued, "relationships, reputation." I nodded. "It cost me my place in the family long before this." My father finally spoke. "We didn't think you'd fight back." There it was, the assumption finally voiced. "I wasn't fighting," I said. "I was correcting the record." My mother's eyes filled, but I didn't rush to comfort her. Not this time. "We thought keeping things simple was best," she said. "For whom?" I asked. Neither answered. "I'm not asking for closeness," I said. "I'm asking for boundaries." My father nodded slowly, as if the concept was foreign but logical. "We don't know how to do that," he admitted. "I do," I said. "And I will." They left shortly after, quieter than when they arrived. When the door closed, I leaned against it and let the silence settle. Not the suffocating silence I grew up with, but the kind that exists when nothing is being demanded of you. Melissa didn't attend Thanksgiving that year. Neither did I. The holiday passed without drama, without confrontation, without the familiar ache of pretending. I cooked for myself, ate slowly, and felt something unfamiliar, but welcome. Peace. I understood then that reclaiming control doesn't always end with applause or reconciliation. Sometimes it ends with space. And space, I was learning, was not emptiness. It was ownership. The quiet after Thanksgiving wasn't empty. It was alert. That was the best way I could describe it. Like the air after a storm when everything looks the same but feels different if you're paying attention. Melissa didn't reach out. Neither did Ethan. My parents limited themselves to brief, careful messages that carried no questions, only updates. I read them without responding. For the first time, distance wasn't punishment. It was maintenance. At work, something shifted too. A week after the trust agreement was finalized, my supervisor forwarded an email chain by mistake. It wasn't dramatic. No insults. Just an internal discussion about restructuring leadership on an upcoming project. My name appeared once, not as a candidate, as a support resource. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. It was familiar, that feeling of being useful, but not essential, competent, but not credited. Before all of this, I would have swallowed it and kept moving, told myself it wasn't personal, told myself to wait my turn. Instead, I forwarded the email to HR and requested a formal role review. No emotion, no accusation, just documentation. 2 days later, I was called into a meeting. They explained there had been oversights, that timelines had moved quickly, that my contributions were valued. I listened. Then I slid a folder across the table. Printed performance reviews, emails praising my work, project outcomes tied directly to decisions I had made. "I'm not asking for validation," I said. "I'm asking for alignment." They offered me a title change, a small raise, vague promises. I declined. "I want the role I'm already doing," I said, "or I'll find somewhere that recognizes it." The silence in that room felt very familiar. They asked for a week. That same week, Andrew called again. "I moved out," he said. I closed my eyes briefly. "I'm sorry." "I'm not," he replied. I needed to know if I was staying because it was easier or because it was right. And I asked. "And I couldn't unhear what she said about you," he said. "About you being an obstacle." I leaned back against my kitchen counter. "That wasn't about me." "I know," he said. "That's what scares me." We didn't talk long. We didn't need to. Melissa found out through someone else. She showed up again 2 nights later. This time she knocked. I opened the door and didn't step aside. "You've destroyed my marriage," she said, her voice tight and brittle. I met her gaze calmly. "No, I stopped covering for you." "You always think you're morally superior," she snapped. "No," I said. "I think patterns matter." Her eyes flashed. "You wanted this. You wanted everyone to see me as the villain." "I wanted to be seen as a person," I replied. She laughed sharp and hollow. "You're not special. You're just difficult." I paused, then nodded once. "That's true. I'm difficult to control." She stood there for a moment, searching for something to say that would still land. When she couldn't find it, she turned and left. I closed the door and felt my hands shaking slightly. Not from fear, from the release of something that had been held too long. The next morning, HR called. They offered me the role, the title, the authority to match my workload. I accepted. That afternoon, I updated my emergency contact at work, removed my parents, added a friend I trusted. A small change, a significant one. Ethan finally reached out that night. I didn't know who I was supposed to be now his message read. I typed back slowly. "You don't have to decide yet. Just stop assuming it's your job to stay quiet." He didn't respond, but he didn't argue either. December moved forward with less resistance than I expected. Invitations stopped coming. Assumptions stopped being made. The absence of pressure revealed how much of my energy had gone into managing other people's comfort. On Christmas morning, my mother sent a photo of the tree. No caption. I looked at it for a long time, then set my phone down. That evening, alone in my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window watching snow collect on the street below. I realized something then that settled deeply and stayed. Revenge had never been about taking something from them. It was about returning what they'd assigned me. The role of absorber, the role of fixer, the role of the one who would understand. I didn't need to punish anyone. I just needed to stop participating. And once I did, everything they'd built around my compliance began to feel unstable. Because systems that depend on one person's silence collapse the moment that silence ends. By January, the story everyone thought was over started resurfacing in places I didn't expect. Not loudly, not with confrontation, through questions. Andrew's separation from Melissa didn't stay private. It couldn't. Their circle was too small, too interconnected. Someone always knew someone who knew why a door had closed, or why a ring no longer appeared in photos. The version Melissa told was careful. She said stress changed people. She said lawyers poisoned minds. She said I had always been resentful and finally snapped. What she didn't say was enough. People began reaching out to me quietly. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. An aunt who had always been polite but distant. Even my grandmother's former caregiver, who sent a short message saying she was glad someone finally spoke up. I answered none of them with details. I didn't correct the record publicly. I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to. The truth had already entered the system, and like water, it was finding its own level. At work, the new role settled in slowly. Authority doesn't feel powerful at first. It feels exposed. People look to you for decisions. They wait to see if you'll flinch. I didn't. I delegated clearly. I documented everything. I stopped over-explaining. When someone tried to slide responsibility back onto me without credit, I returned it calmly and publicly. It didn't make me popular. It made me respected. One afternoon, my supervisor stopped by my desk and said, "You're different lately." I looked up. "How so?" "More decisive," he said, "less flexible." I nodded. "That's intentional." He studied me for a moment, then smiled tightly. "Just make sure it doesn't cost you relationships." I held his gaze. Only the ones built on convenience. He walked away without another word. That night, my father emailed again. "Claire, your mother is struggling. She feels like she's lost you." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "Dad, you didn't lose me. You lost access to the version of me who stayed quiet to keep things comfortable. I didn't send anything else." A week later, Melissa tried a different approach. She sent a long message, apologetic in tone, vague in content. "I never meant to hurt you. I was overwhelmed. I didn't realize how much it mattered to you. We're sisters. We shouldn't be on opposite sides." I read it twice, then once more. Not once did she acknowledge what she did. Not once did she name it. Not once did she say she was wrong. I typed a response, then deleted it. Instead, I wrote one sentence. "I'm not on the opposite side." I stepped off the field. Her reply came fast. "You're being dramatic." I didn't answer. That silence did something different this time. It didn't provoke escalation. It exposed emptiness. There was nothing left to argue against if I refused to re-enter the dynamic. 2 days later, Margaret called. Marge called. "There's something else," she said. During discovery, we uncovered an addendum tied to the family trust that wasn't activated. My chest tightened slightly. What kind of addendum? One your grandmother added years ago, she replied. It assigns decision-making authority to the beneficiary who contests improper modification. Temporary but binding. I sat down slowly. What does that mean? I asked. It means Margaret said carefully that you now have limited control over how the trust is administered until the next scheduled review. Control? The word landed differently now. I didn't feel excited. I felt alert. What do I need to do? I asked. Nothing immediately, she said. But your parents will have to consult you on future decisions. I closed my eyes briefly. This was the part no one had anticipated. Not because it was dramatic, but because it shifted leverage quietly. That evening, my mother called. Her voice was softer than I'd heard it in years. We got a notice, she said, about the trust. I know, I replied. We didn't realize your grandmother set it up that way. I'm sure, I said. She hesitated. What are you going to do? The question wasn't about money. It was about fear. I'm going to do exactly what the role requires, I said. Nothing more. Another pause. We should meet, she said, as a family. I considered it, then answered honestly, not yet. When the call ended, I sat alone in my apartment and thought about how many times I'd been asked to meet as a family when the goal was to reset me back into compliance. This time was different. This time the system required my presence whether they liked it or not. And for the first time, that power didn't feel intoxicating. It felt heavy, because real control isn't about winning. It's about deciding what you refuse to carry anymore. The first meeting, under the new structure, was scheduled for mid-February. Not a family dinner, not a holiday. A formal review call with the trust administrator present, minutes, recorded agenda circulated in advance. That detail alone said more than any apology ever could. For years, decisions had happened in kitchens and hallways. Now they required documentation. I joined the call from my apartment laptop, open a legal pad beside me. My parents were together in their living room. Melissa joined from her office. Ethan dialed in late. No one spoke casually. The administrator walked through updates, investment performance, maintenance costs on the vacation property my grandmother had left behind, upcoming decisions that required beneficiary input. Then he turned to me. As temporary oversight holder, Ms. Donovan will need your approval on proposed adjustments. The silence that followed was thick. Melissa shifted in her chair. My mother folded her hands tightly. My father stared straight ahead. I didn't rush. Send me the documentation, I said. I'll review it and respond in writing. Professional, neutral, unassailable. Melissa finally spoke. This is excessive. I looked at her on the screen. This is governance. She scoffed. You're enjoying being in charge. I met her gaze calmly. I'm enjoying clarity. The administrator cleared his throat and continued. When the call ended, no one lingered. No one tried to chat. No one asked how I was. For the first time, the absence of small talk didn't feel like rejection. It felt appropriate. That weekend, I received a message from Ethan. This is weird. I don't like how tense everything is. I typed back. Tension shows where pressure used to be absorbed quietly. He didn't reply. A few days later, my mother emailed me. The subject line read, simply, question. She asked whether I would approve funding for renovations to the vacation house. Normally, that decision would have been made without discussion, framed later as a courtesy update. I asked for bids, timelines, impact projections. She responded with clipped efficiency. When I approved it, I did so conditionally with documentation attached. The power shift wasn't dramatic. It was procedural, and that was what unsettled them most. Melissa tried again to regain footing. She sent a message late one night. You don't have to do this. We could go back to how things were. I read it once, then replied. I don't go back to systems that required my silence to function. Her response came slower this time. You've changed. I typed one line. I stopped compensating. At work, the changes continued quietly. A colleague tried to bypass me on a decision and was redirected. Another asked for my opinion and waited for it. Authority, I learned, settles when you stop apologizing for it. One afternoon, HR sent a calendar invite titled Leadership Pathway Discussion. I smiled faintly. That night, my father called. I don't recognize this family anymore, he said. I leaned against my window, looking out at the city lights. I do, I replied. I just don't fit the version you were used to. He sighed. Your mother feels like she failed. I paused. She did. That doesn't make her irredeemable. It makes her responsible. He was quiet for a long time. Are you ever going to forgive us? He asked. The question was softer than I expected. I'm not holding a grudge, I said. I'm holding boundaries. There was a difference. He didn't argue. Melissa didn't speak to me for weeks after that, but her absence didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt like withdrawal. She no longer had access to the version of me she could manage. By the end of February, Andrew filed for divorce. I heard it from my mother first, her voice trembling with worry about appearances. "What will people think?" she asked. I answered honestly. "They'll think something broke that was already cracked." She didn't disagree. That night, alone in my apartment, I reviewed the trust documents again. Not out of anxiety, out of habit. Everything was in order. For the first time, I wasn't bracing for the next move. I wasn't waiting for someone to overstep so I could react. I was operating from position, and that realization settled into something steady. The revenge wasn't loud, it wasn't cruel, it wasn't even personal anymore. It was structural. I hadn't destroyed my family. I had removed myself from the role that kept their dysfunction comfortable. And once that role disappeared, everything else had to reorganize around the truth. March arrived without drama. That more than anything told me how much had changed. In the past, silence from my family would have felt like punishment. I would have replayed conversations, searched for hidden meanings, waited for the next demand disguised as concern. Now the quiet felt neutral, informational, like a system idling because no one was misusing it. The next trust review came and went without incident. I approved routine items. I declined one proposal that lacked documentation. No one argued. They simply revised and resubmitted. That was the new language. At work, the leadership discussion turned into an offer, a real one. Not a promise, not a trial period. A clear role with defined authority and accountability. I accepted it without hesitation. The night I signed the contract, I realized something that made me stop mid-motion, pen hovering over paper. I wasn't nervous, not excited in a shaky way, not relieved, just steady. For most of my life, milestones had come with emotional negotiations attached. Who would this upset? Who would feel left out? Who would accuse me of changing? This one belonged entirely to me. That same week, my mother asked if we could meet one-on-one. Not a family meeting, not a dinner, coffee. I considered the request longer than I needed to. Not because I was afraid, but because I was checking my own motives. Was I open to conversation or still braced for impact? I agreed. We met at a small cafe halfway between our homes. Neutral territory again. She arrived early, her hands wrapped around her cup the way they did when she was trying to stay composed. "You look well," she said. "So do you," I replied. She nodded, then went quiet. The silence stretched. This time I didn't feel it. "I've been in therapy," she said finally. I waited. "They asked me why I always assumed you didn't need anything," she continued. And I realized I didn't have an answer that didn't make me uncomfortable. I let that land. "I told myself you were strong," she said. But I think I used that word so I wouldn't have to face my own fear. If you needed something, I wouldn't know how to give it without admitting I'd failed you before. I studied her carefully. This wasn't an apology, but it was closer than anything she'd ever offered. "I didn't need perfection," I said. "I needed inclusion." She nodded slowly. "I know that now." We sat in silence again, not tense, not warm, honest. "I don't expect things to go back," she said. "I know they can't." "No," I agreed. "But I hope we can build something different," she added. "At your pace." That was new. Pace. "I'm open to careful contact," I said, "not access." She accepted that without protest. Melissa didn't reach out. I heard about her through other channels, that she'd moved into a smaller apartment, that she'd taken a leave from work, that she was angry at everyone and no one at once. Ethan called me one evening unexpectedly. "I think I'm going to move," he said. "Out of state." "That sounds like a big decision," I replied. "I don't know who I am when I'm not the easy one," he admitted. I smiled faintly. "You'll find out." There was a pause. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up," he said. I believed him. By the end of the month, the trust oversight period ended automatically, just as my grandmother had written it. Control reverted to shared governance. But something important remained. The structure had changed. Nothing could be altered quietly anymore. The system now required transparency consultation record. I didn't need authority to maintain my place. The rules did that for me. One night, I opened my laptop and reread the notes I'd written months earlier. The ones that had started this whole process. The list of moments I'd minimized, the patterns I'd ignored. I didn't feel anger reading them. I felt distance. They belonged to someone who had survived by staying small, someone who thought endurance was love. I closed the document and deleted it. I didn't need reminders anymore. As March bled into April, I noticed something else. I wasn't waiting for karma. I wasn't checking to see who was suffering or learning or paying for what they'd done. Their consequences were theirs. My work was done. And that realization, more than any legal win or family shift, told me the story was nearly complete. Because real revenge doesn't end with someone else falling. It ends when you no longer need to watch. The last thing I did was nothing. That may sound small, but for someone like me, it was the most deliberate action of all. Spring settled in quietly. Trees outside my apartment softened into green. Morning light stayed longer. My calendar filled with work that belonged to me and evenings that didn't require explanation. The world didn't reward me with fireworks or dramatic closure. It simply stopped demanding that I disappear. My family adjusted without me managing the transition. My parents continued therapy. They learned slowly and awkwardly how to sit with discomfort instead of delegating it. Sometimes my mother sent updates. Sometimes she didn't. I no longer tracked the pattern for meaning. Ethan moved west 2 months later. He sent a photo of a small, empty apartment with boxes stacked against one wall. The caption read, "First night. No one telling me what I should be." I smiled and wished him luck. Melissa remained quiet. That silence used to haunt me. It no longer did. I heard through someone else that she'd told a friend I'd changed, that I'd become cold, that she didn't recognize me anymore. I didn't correct it. People describe loss however they need to. At work, the promotion became routine. Meetings, decisions, accountability. I stopped being introduced as helpful and started being introduced as responsible. The difference was subtle, but absolute. One afternoon, a junior colleague asked how I learned to hold boundaries without apologizing. I thought for a moment before answering. I didn't learn it, I said. I stopped unlearning it. That night, alone in my apartment, I poured a glass of water and stood by the window the way I often did when I needed to take stock. The city moved below me, indifferent and alive. Somewhere families were eating dinner. Somewhere someone was being chosen. Somewhere else, someone was being overlooked. I understood something then, with a clarity that didn't sting. I hadn't won anything. I had reclaimed. I hadn't embarrassed anyone. I hadn't exposed secrets out of spite. I hadn't demanded love. I had simply removed my consent from a system that relied on my silence. And once that consent was gone, everything else rearranged itself naturally. That was the real lesson. Not that family can betray you. Not that people choose convenience over care. Not even that karma always arrives on schedule. The lesson was this: if you are always the one expected to understand, to absorb, to stay quiet, that is not love. That is control wearing a familiar face. And the moment you stop cooperating with that illusion, you don't need revenge. You get your life back. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been told you were strong when what they meant was silent, leave a comment. Share what choosing yourself looked like in your life. And if you want more stories about boundaries, justice, and the quiet power of reclaiming your place, make sure you're subscribed. Because sometimes the most powerful ending isn't confrontation. It's walking away with your dignity intact.